There are names in the world of music that do not simply fade with time. They become woven into the very fabric of culture, history, and human emotion. Diana Ross is one of those names. For more than 6 decades, she has stood at the center of American entertainment, a woman whose voice could silence a room, whose presence could fill a stadium, and whose resilience could outlast almost any storm life threw at her. But today, as Diana Ross has crossed the threshold of 80 years of life, the world is beginning to ask a quieter, more somber question. Behind all the glamour, the sequins, and the spotlights, how is she truly living? And the honest answer, pieced together from years of public observation, is one that carries more than a little heartbreak. To understand where Diana Ross stands today, you have to understand where she came from, because the distance between those 2 points is nothing short of extraordinary. She was born on March 26, 1944, in Detroit, Michigan, the second of 6 children raised by Ernestine and Fred Ross Sr. The family was not wealthy. They were working-class people of faith, rooted in the Baptist tradition, trying to hold their lives together in a city that was simultaneously bursting with industrial promise and quietly strangled by racial inequality. When Diana was still a young girl, her mother fell gravely ill with tuberculosis. The children were sent away to Alabama to live with their maternal grandparents while their mother recovered. It was a period of separation and uncertainty that would quietly shape Diana's emotional landscape for the rest of her life, teaching her early that love and loss often arrive at the same door. Once the family reunited and relocated to the Brewster Douglas housing projects on St. Antoine Street, Diana channeled everything she had into ambition. She attended Cass Technical High School, one of Detroit's most prestigious preparatory schools, and dreamed of becoming a fashion designer. She took classes in clothing design, pattern making, and tailoring. She modeled on weekends. She did her neighbor's hair to earn a little extra money. She was relentlessly, quietly determined. But music had other plans for her. At just 15 years old, Diana Ross joined a young female vocal group that would eventually be known as the Supremes. What began as a collection of talented teenagers from the Detroit projects, including Florence Ballard and Mary Wilson, became one of the most celebrated acts in the history of popular music. Under the roof of Motown Records and the guiding hand of Berry Gordy, the Supremes transformed American pop culture. Their 1964 hit Where Did Our Love Go shot to #1 and opened the floodgates. What followed was an almost unreal string of chart-topping singles, sold-out performances, and cultural milestones that placed these young black women at the center of a music world that had not always been willing to make room for them. Diana Ross was the face and voice of that revolution. She was luminous on stage, magnetic, precise, emotionally compelling. But behind the scenes, the pressures were enormous. Motown was a machine, and everyone inside it was expected to perform, to produce, and to project perfection at all times. The personal cost of that expectation would not fully reveal itself until years later. Her romantic relationship with Berry Gordy, which developed during those years, added another layer of complexity to an already complicated life. The relationship produced her eldest daughter, Rhonda, though the circumstances surrounding Rhonda's paternity remained private for years, only revealed to Rhonda herself when she was a teenager. It was a secret that, by any measure, carried considerable emotional weight for everyone involved. When Diana Ross stepped away from the Supremes in 1970 to pursue a solo career, many observers wondered whether she could sustain the momentum on her own. She answered that question decisively and repeatedly. Her film debut in Lady Sings the Blues in 1972, a loose biographical portrait of jazz legend Billie Holiday, earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress and established her as a serious dramatic force, not merely a pop star crossing over into acting. Jazz critics who had initially been skeptical of her casting were won over by the depth and authenticity of her performance. The decades that followed brought more hits, more tours, more reinventions. She recorded Touch Me in the Morning, Love Hangover, I'm Coming Out, Upside Down, and the legendary duet Endless Love with Lionel Richie. Each era of her career seemed to introduce her to a new generation of fans, and she never stopped evolving. She signed with RCA Records in 1981 in one of the most expensive recording contracts in music history at that time, a $20 million deal that gave her full creative control over her work. But wealth and fame, as anyone who has watched this industry long enough well knows, do not automatically translate into peace. Diana Ross married twice, and both marriages ended in ways that left scars. Her first husband, music executive Robert Ellis Silverstein, fathered 2 of her daughters, Tracy Ellis Ross, who would go on to become a celebrated actress in her own right, and Chudney Lane Silverstein. The marriage ended in divorce in 1977. Her second marriage, to Norwegian shipping magnate Arne Næss Jr. in 1986, brought her great happiness for a time. She became a stepmother to his 3 children, and together they had 2 sons, Ross Næss and Evan Ross. By most accounts, Næss was the great love of her adult life. She has spoken about him with a tenderness that never fully disappears from her voice, even decades later. Yet that marriage, too, ended in 2000, following reports that Næss had fathered a child with another woman in Norway. The betrayal, whether or not those words were ever spoken directly, was real and undeniable. And then, in January 2004, Arne Næss Jr. died tragically in a mountaineering accident in South Africa. The man she considered the love of her life was simply gone. Whatever complicated feelings existed between them, the divorce, the distance, the years of rebuilding, none of it prepared her for that finality. Grief, especially for a love that never quite resolved itself, is among the heaviest things a person can carry. Even before the loss of Næss, Diana Ross had faced a very public and painful stumble. On December 30, 2002, she was arrested for driving under the influence in Tucson, Arizona, a particularly complicated moment given that she was at the time undergoing treatment at a substance abuse rehabilitation facility in the same city. She was subsequently sentenced to 2 days in jail, which she served near her Connecticut estate. The incident was widely reported and, in the way of celebrity news, was quickly consumed and then largely forgotten by the public. But for Diana Ross, it represented something far more personal, an acknowledgement that beneath the composed and immaculate exterior she had always presented to the world, there was a woman who had been struggling, quietly and privately, for a long time. Nobody walks through the life Diana Ross has lived, the early poverty, the sacrifices, the public scrutiny, the complicated relationships, the profound losses, without accumulating wounds that the cameras never capture. Today, at 80 years old, Diana Ross continues to move through the world with a dignity that commands respect. She has remained close to her 5 children, Rhonda, Tracy, Chudney, Ross, and Evan, and has embraced her identity as a grandmother with visible joy. At the 2017 American Music Awards Lifetime Achievement Celebration, she brought all of her grandchildren onto the stage with her, a moment of pure and unguarded happiness that was genuinely moving to witness. She has continued to perform well into her 70s and beyond. In June 2022, she performed at the Platinum Jubilee celebration for Queen Elizabeth II. That same month, she took the stage at Glastonbury Festival, fulfilling a long-postponed commitment, having first been scheduled for the festival's 50th anniversary before the COVID-19 pandemic intervened. In 2023, she launched her Music Legacy Tour, celebrating her greatest hits and reaffirming her connection to audiences who have loved her for generations. But performing at this level, at this age, while carrying this much history, it is not without its difficulties. Those who have attended recent concerts have noted that while her presence remains commanding and her spirit unmistakably alive, the physical demands of live performance take their toll. She is 80 years old. The voice that once rang out with effortless clarity now carries the texture of a life fully and sometimes painfully lived. And beyond the stage, what is her daily life like? By most accounts, she lives quietly when not performing. The grand public life has given way to something more private, more personal. She has spoken in interviews about the importance of family, of gratitude, and of legacy, not in the way that celebrities sometimes perform these sentiments, but in the way of someone who has genuinely reckoned with what matters and what does not. There is sadness in her story, but it is not the sadness of failure. It is something more nuanced, the sadness of a woman who gave almost everything she had to a career and a public that adored her, while navigating private heartbreaks that no spotlight can illuminate and no applause can heal. The loss of her great love. The complicated truths she held for years before sharing them with her own daughter. The substance struggles. The endings of marriages she had hoped would last. These are not small things. Whatever the remaining chapters of Diana Ross's life hold, the chapters already written are extraordinary. She holds 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one as a solo artist, one as a member of the Supremes. The Supremes were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988. In 1976, Billboard magazine named her the Female Entertainer of the Century, a title that was ambitious at the time and seems, in retrospect, entirely justified. In 2016, President Barack Obama honored her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor the United States can bestow. Her influence on the artists who followed her is impossible to fully measure. Beyoncé, Madonna, Michael Jackson. All have acknowledged the imprint Diana Ross left on their understanding of what a performer could be. She showed generations of black women in particular that the stage was not merely something they could stand on, it was something they could own. There is something both beautiful and heartbreaking about watching a legend age in public. We are so accustomed to seeing Diana Ross as she appeared in the photographs and performances that define her legacy, impossibly glamorous, precise, radiant. The reality of 80 years of living, with all its losses and compromises and quiet griefs, sits alongside that image now, and the contrast is what makes her story so profoundly human. She is not diminished. She is not broken. But she has been through more than most people ever glimpse, and some of that shows now in ways it did not before. That is not sad in the way the tabloids mean when they use that word. It is sad in the deeper, true sense, the way all great lives are eventually sad, because they carry the full weight of everything that was risked, everything that was loved, and everything that, despite all the talent and determination and will in the world, could not be held onto forever. Diana Ross gave the world her voice, her image, and decades of her life.